Christmas dinner was already halfway over when he said it. We were seated around the long dining table in Maple Ridge, Vermont, the kind of small town where people still waved from their driveways and pretended families stayed intact just because the snow looked pretty. The turkey had been carved. Plates were full. My granddaughter was laughing about something that didn't matter, and then my son-in-law cleared his throat. "Well," he said, leaning back in his chair, napkin tucked into his collar like he owned the place, "we should probably talk about what happens next. You can't stay independent forever." The room went quiet. "Before I tell you what happened next, subscribe the channel and let me know in the comments where are you watching from. It helps more than you know. My name is Edgar Holloway. I am 74 years old, and I have learned that when someone decides your future without asking you, they've already written you out of their respect." He didn't look at me when he continued. "We've been discussing options," he said. "Assisted living, maybe a nursing home, somewhere you'll be taken care of." He finally met my eyes then, smiled, like he was doing me a favor. My daughter sat beside him, hands folded tightly in her lap. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at him either. She stared at the center of the table like silence might protect her from choosing sides. I waited. No one spoke up. Not my daughter, not my sister-in-law, not anyone. That's when I realized something important. This wasn't a conversation, it was an announcement. "I didn't ask for options," I said calmly. My voice surprised even me. It didn't shake. He chuckled. "You don't always get to ask, Edgar. This is about practicality. Practicality. That word people use when they want to sound reasonable while stripping someone of control." I looked around the table, at the decorations, at the plates, at the family photos lining the walls, most of them featuring memories I'd helped pay for, organize, or rescue at some point. "I'm still capable," I said. "For now," he replied quickly, too quickly. My daughter's jaw tightened. Still, she said nothing. I felt something settle in my chest, not anger, not sadness, finality. I excused myself politely, pushed my chair back, picked up my coat. "I'll head out," I said. My granddaughter looked confused. "Grandpa? I'll see you soon," I told her, and meant it. No one stopped me. Outside, the air was sharp and clean. Snow crunched under my shoes. As I walked to my car, my hands were steady as I started the engine. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I drove home to the small house I'd lived in since my wife passed. The one I'd maintained myself, fixed myself, paid off myself, and for the first time that night I laughed softly, because the mistake they'd made wasn't suggesting a nursing home. It was assuming they had the authority. That night I opened a folder I hadn't touched in years, not out of spite, out of clarity. They thought Christmas was the moment they took control. What they didn't realize yet was that Christmas was the moment I stopped explaining myself. And once that happens, everything else starts to rearrange itself quietly and permanently. I woke up the morning after Christmas before dawn. The house was quiet in the way it only gets when everyone else is still asleep somewhere else. No laughter, no clinking dishes, just the soft hum of the heater and the old clock in the hallway marking time without opinion. I sat at the kitchen table and replayed the moment again. Not his words, but the silence that followed them. My daughter's silence. People think betrayal is loud. It isn't. It's often the absence of a voice when one is needed most. I made coffee and drank it slowly, letting the bitterness settle. I wasn't angry. Anger burns hot and fades. What I felt was sharper than that. Cleaner. Assessment. I'd spent most of my life preparing for emergencies that never came. Repairs. Setbacks. Illness. What I hadn't prepared for was being reduced to a problem to be managed over turkey and mashed potatoes. Mid-morning, my phone buzzed. A message from my daughter. I didn't know how to stop it. "We'll talk soon." I stared at it for a long time. Soon is a word people use when they want time to soften what they didn't prevent. I didn't reply. Instead, I went down to the basement and pulled out the metal lockbox tucked behind the old filing cabinet. Inside were documents I'd kept updated without telling anyone. Not secrets, just records. Deeds, statements, insurance policies, notes written in my own hand explaining decisions in case someone ever tried to explain them for me. I sat on the floor and went through everything carefully. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was forgotten. I wasn't dependent. I wasn't drifting. and I certainly wasn't incapable. That afternoon I drove to the edge of town and walked the frozen path along the river. I'd done that walk hundreds of times, but that day I noticed how many people my age were out there alone, moving at their own pace, unescorted and unashamed. No one was being managed. They were living. That evening my son-in-law called. I let it ring. He left a voicemail. "Edgar, let's not make this dramatic," he said. "We're just trying to plan responsibly." There it was again, that word, plan. As if my life were a spreadsheet he'd inherited early. I deleted the message. Later my daughter called. I answered that one. "Dad," she said quietly, "he shouldn't have said it like that." "No," I replied, "he shouldn't have said it at all." She was quiet. I could hear the television in the background. Christmas specials, probably. People pretending everything ends neatly. I froze, she admitted. "I didn't want to make it worse." "You didn't make it worse," I said gently. "You clarified it." She inhaled sharply. "That's not fair." "It's accurate," I replied. We didn't argue. There was nothing to argue about. Facts don't raise their voices. After we hung up, I wrote 3 names on a piece of paper. None of them were family. They were people who'd shown up when I needed them, without titles or expectations. A neighbor, an old colleague, a retired nurse I'd helped years earlier who still checked in. Support isn't about blood, it's about reliability. Before bed, I opened my calendar and scheduled appointments I'd been postponing. Legal, medical, financial. Not because I was afraid of losing control, but because I was done letting anyone assume I already had. As I turned off the lights, I thought about the look on my son-in-law's face when he'd said those words. Confident, comfortable, certain. Certainty without permission is a dangerous thing. He thought he'd started a process. What he didn't realize was that he'd simply exposed one, and once exposed, a process can be redirected, especially by the person it was meant to erase. The appointments lined up faster than I expected. Once I started making them, doors opened easily, as if the world had been waiting for me to stop hesitating. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of paper and coffee. The doctor's waiting room was quiet, efficient, uninterested in family drama. Both places felt grounding in their own way. At the legal office, I sat across from a woman who listened more than she spoke. "What brings you in?" she asked. "I want my future to be handled by consent," I replied. "Not assumption." She nodded once, then asked practical questions. Health directives, financial authority, emergency contacts. I answered each one without emotion because this wasn't about proving anything. It was about structure. "And your family?" she asked carefully. "I love my daughter," I said, "but I won't outsource my autonomy." She didn't flinch, just wrote it down. By the time I left, I felt something unfamiliar and welcome. Lightness, not relief. Alignment. That afternoon, I went to my medical appointment. Routine checkup, blood pressure steady, mobility strong for a man my age. The doctor smiled at the chart. "You're doing better than most men 5 years younger," she said. "I plan to keep it that way," I replied. On the drive home, my phone rang. My daughter again. I answered. "Dad," she said, sounding tired. "He didn't mean to humiliate you." "I know," I said. "He meant to manage me." I'm not asking you to choose sides," I interrupted gently. "I'm asking you to notice what happened." Silence. "I froze," she said finally. "I didn't want to fight on Christmas." "I understand," I replied, "but understand this too. Silence is still participation." She exhaled shakily. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to live," I said, "and I'm going to plan as if I'll be allowed to." That evening, I cooked dinner for myself and ate at the table instead of the couch. Small rituals matter when you're recentering. Afterward, I sorted mail I'd been ignoring. Bills, notices, a holiday card from a neighbor who'd lost her husband the year before. Inside the card was a simple line, "Glad you're still here." I set it aside. The next day, my son-in-law sent a message. "We're just worried. You don't have to push us away." I stared at the screen, then set the phone down. Concern doesn't arrive with declarations, it arrives with questions. I didn't respond. Instead, I drove across town to meet an old friend for lunch, someone who knew me before I was a widower, before I was elderly in anyone's mouth. We talked about nothing important and everything that was. "You seem steady," he said. "I am." I replied. Because I stopped waiting for permission. That night I opened the folder the lawyer had given me and read through the drafts. Clean language, clear intent, no ambiguity. The kind of paperwork people fear because it removes leverage. I thought about Christmas again. The decorations, the laughter, the moment the room had shifted and no one noticed except me. People often think the turning point is the confrontation. It isn't. It's the moment you realize you don't need to defend your worth to anyone who benefits from doubting it. Before bed, I wrote a short note in my journal. Not for my daughter, not for anyone else. Just for me. Independence isn't loneliness. It's authorship. I closed the book and turned off the light. They thought the conversation at Christmas had settled something. What it actually did was remind me of a truth I'd almost forgotten. When someone decides your future without asking, the most powerful response isn't protest. It's preparation. And preparation has a way of speaking for itself long after the room goes quiet. The paperwork took shape slowly, the way important things should. Nothing was rushed. Every clause was read twice, every assumption challenged. I wasn't undoing my life, I was tightening it, removing the slack that others had mistaken for weakness. The attorney called midweek. I've drafted a framework, she said. Before we finalize it, there's one question you need to answer clearly. Go ahead, I said. Do you want your daughter or her husband to have any decision-making authority if you become incapacitated? I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know, but because I wanted to be honest without being cruel. No, I said finally. Not authority. Information maybe, but not control. She nodded even though I couldn't see her. That's clear and reasonable. After the call, I sat at the kitchen table and looked around the room. Same table, same chair, same view out the window. Nothing about my daily life suggested decline. Yet somewhere else, someone had decided I was already on my way out. That disconnect stayed with me. My daughter came by 2 days later, alone. She stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping inside like she wasn't sure she was welcome. You are, I said, saving her the discomfort. She smiled faintly and set her coat down. I've been thinking a lot, she said, about Christmas. I have too, I replied. She sat across from me. I should have said something. Yes, I said gently. She flinched but nodded. I didn't want to make it worse. I know, I said, but silence always costs someone. She looked down at her hands. He thinks you're angry. I'm not, I said. I'm precise. That made her look up. I'm not cutting you out of my life, I continued, but I am no longer placing my future in someone else's hands, especially someone who spoke about me as if I wasn't in the room. She swallowed. He didn't mean it that way. I believe you, I said, and that's part of the problem. We talked for a while after that. Not loudly, not dramatically, just honestly. She asked questions, I answered them. I didn't justify my decisions and she didn't challenge them. When she left, she hugged me longer than usual. I love you, she said. I know, I replied. Just remember to act like it when it matters. That weekend, a letter arrived from a senior care facility in a nearby town. Glossy photos, smiling staff, phrases like peace of mind and family transition planning. I didn't open it. I set it on the counter and left it there, unopened, until the next morning, when I threw it away. Not out of spite, out of relevance. Later that day, my attorney confirmed the medical directives were complete. Clear lines, clear authority, no room for reinterpretation by anyone who wasn't named explicitly. That night, my son-in-law called. I didn't answer. He didn't leave a message. That silence felt different than my daughter's had. Less conflicted, more strategic. I took a walk after dinner. The cold air sharp and honest. Lights were on in other houses, families gathered. Arguments probably happening behind some of those doors. Quiet understandings behind others. I wasn't excluded from life. I was simply no longer negotiating my place in it. By the time I returned home, I felt settled. Christmas had exposed something. But exposure isn't destruction. Sometimes it's just illumination. And once you see clearly, you don't need permission to adjust your footing. You just do it and let the ground catch up. The first real shift came quietly. No arguments, no ultimatums, just a change in how people approached me. My daughter called more often. Short check-ins, neutral questions. She never mentioned the nursing home again. My son-in-law didn't call at all, which told me he was recalculating rather than retreating. People like him don't apologize, they adjust strategy. I noticed it when paperwork started arriving that I hadn't requested. Mail from financial planners. Invitations to family consultations. A glossy envelope marked important planning update addressed to me but clearly written for someone else's benefit. I didn't open any of it. Instead, I took everything to my attorney. She didn't look surprised. "This happens when someone assumes future authority and then loses it," she said. "They try to reinsert themselves through process." "Can they?" I asked. She shook her head. "Not the way things are structured now." That was the point. What I'd put in place wasn't aggressive, it wasn't punitive, it was boring, layered, inconvenient for anyone who wanted shortcuts. In other words, it worked. That weekend, my daughter came over again, this time with her husband. He was polite, overly so. Compliments about the house, about how well I looked, about how independent I still was. Still, that word again. We sat at the table, coffee between us. Neutral ground. "I think things got misunderstood on Christmas," he said carefully. "No," I replied. "They were understood clearly. They were just said out loud." He smiled tightly. "We were only trying to plan ahead. For yourselves," I said. "Not with me." My daughter shifted uncomfortably. He cleared his throat. "We're just concerned about emergencies," he continued. "What if something happens suddenly? Then the plan I put in place activates," I replied calmly. He frowned. "Which plan?" "The one that doesn't involve you making decisions for me." The air changed. He looked at my daughter. She looked down. "I didn't exclude you from my life," I added. "I excluded assumptions." "That feels like punishment," he said. "It feels like accountability," I replied. Silence stretched across the table. Finally, my daughter spoke. "What do you need from us?" The question surprised me. I thought about it for a moment. "Respect," I said, "and presence without control." She nodded. He didn't. We ended the visit politely. No raised voices, no resolution either. But something important had happened. The dynamic had shifted. They were no longer discussing my future as if it were theirs to arrange. They were responding to it. After they left, I sat alone and felt something unexpected. Peace, not relief, not victory. Peace, the kind that comes when you stop negotiating your dignity. Over the next few weeks, life settled into a new rhythm. I met friends for lunch, volunteered at the local library once a week, took longer walks, slept better. The phone rang less, and when it did, it was because someone wanted to hear my voice, not manage my trajectory. One afternoon, my attorney called. "All documents are finalized," she said. "Everything is active." I thanked her and hung up. That night, I cooked a proper meal and ate slowly at the table. The same table where I'd once felt small on Christmas. Funny how furniture doesn't change, but meaning does. I realized then that the hardest part of aging isn't the body. It's watching people project their fears onto you and call it concern. Christmas had given them permission to speak. The months after had given me permission to act. And the thing about action is that it doesn't need witnesses. It just needs consistency. As I washed the dishes and turned off the kitchen light, I felt certain of one thing. They had underestimated my willingness to walk away from roles that no longer fit. What they hadn't yet realized was that when someone steps out of a script quietly, everyone else has to relearn their lines, and not everyone is prepared for that. Spring arrived without ceremony. The snow melted. The days stretched. The world kept moving, indifferent to family politics and quiet reckonings. I liked that about it. Life didn't dramatically improve after Christmas, it clarified. My daughter settled into a new way of interacting with me. Less management, more listening. She called before visiting, asked instead of assumed. When she offered help, it came with an easy out, not an expectation. That mattered. My son-in-law stayed distant, cordial at gatherings, polite in messages sent through my daughter. He never mentioned nursing homes again. He never apologized either. I didn't need him to. The plan was already in place. My days found a rhythm that felt earned. Morning walks, appointments handled by professionals who answered to contracts, not convenience. Evenings spent reading or cooking meals that took time. I was no longer rushing toward anything or bracing against it. One afternoon, my daughter stopped by unexpectedly. Alone. She stood in the kitchen for a moment, then said, "He doesn't understand why you didn't fight." I smiled faintly. "I did, just not the way he expected." She nodded slowly. "I see that now." That was enough. We talked about ordinary things, her work, my garden plans, the neighbor who fed the birds too aggressively, nothing heavy, nothing strategic. Before she left, she hugged me and said, "I'm glad you're still you." I watched her drive away and felt no bitterness. Boundaries don't push people out. They reveal who's willing to stay without conditions. Months passed. Holidays came and went without declarations or drama. I was invited. I attended when I wanted. I left when I was tired. No one commented on it. That was the real change. I wasn't being managed anymore. Late one evening, I sat at the same kitchen table where Christmas dinner had been dissected into assumptions. The house was quiet. The kettle hummed. The clock kept time the way it always had. Steady, unconcerned. I thought about aging. Not as decline, as authorship. There's a point when you stop asking how much space you're allowed to take and start deciding how you'll occupy it. Christmas marked that moment for me. My son-in-law thought his words would settle my future. Instead, they freed it. I didn't cut anyone off. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make threats or demands. I simply stepped out of a role I never agreed to play, and once you do that, the rest rearranges itself naturally, quietly, permanently. And if you've been listening this far, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you're watching from. It helps more than you know.